Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Kvod. That was wonderful. Um, I am Rabbi DePaolo from Congregation Shir Hamalot in Irvine. It is a joy and a blessing to be with you all this evening. It's been so wonderful to scroll through all of the faces and see names I recognize and faces I recognize, and then also opportunities to meet new friends as well from across the county. Um, to this evening, I was going to say today, but we're not really in the daytime anymore. I am also experiencing the lateness of the hour, I will admit that, and my kavod put me in a very calm place. So I want to invite everybody to take a second and wake up a little bit if you need to. Shake things out. I certainly needed a moment to do that. Um, so I am going to share my screen now. What I'd like to talk this evening about is when Torah texts challenge us. So there are so many beautiful teachings that we get from our tradition, and I love them. But I think sometimes we find the most meaning when we find something that doesn't comfort us quite so much, and then we find that comfort within ourselves, and we do a little wrestling for a blessing, as it were. There we go. All right, now I can see everybody again. Since I can't see everybody all at once, obviously, if you have a comment, I would invite you to please either share something in the chat or to raise your Zoom hand, your little blue hand, because if you wave in the screen, I may not be able to see you. But if you go into participants, you can find the way to raise your Zoom hand, as it were. So we're going to start actually with a text and a teaching from the Talmud, which talks about the things we're not supposed to talk about, which are always my favorite topics. We start with a teaching from the Mishnah, which says there are certain texts that we're supposed to read out loud, certain texts that we can translate when we're reading out loud. So this is even during the time of the Mishnah, the 2nd century CE, there was an understanding that not everybody spoke or read Hebrew, and so they might hear Torah being read, but they might not understand what they were hearing. And then there are some texts that can neither be read nor translated. So we'll take a look at what those are. Mishnah says, the incident of Reuben, and so this translation comes from Sepharia, which offers both commentary and translation. So the parts that are bolded are sort of the relatively direct translation of the Hebrew, and the parts that aren't bolded are the commentary, so the traditional understanding of what's happening in the text. So the incident of Reuben, explanation says, about which it says, and Reuben went and lay with Bilhah. So Reuben was one of Jacob's sons, his oldest son, and Reuben has a night with one of Jacob's other wives, with Bilhah. And the Mishnah says that this is read from the Torah in public, but not translated. The incident of Tamar, which is referring to the story of Judah and Tamar, where somebody's annotating on my screen. I don't think it's me. That is read in public and also translated. So even though maybe Judah comes off looking a little bit foolish, we read the story and we translate it because actually at the end he seems to have learned something and he admits his mistakes. We go on to say the first report of the incident of the golden calf. So our translation explains that this is the first telling of what happened. That is read and translated, but the second narrative which is when Aaron tells Moses what happened, which is sort of a reinterpretation of the events, or there seems to be a disagreement between how Aaron understands what's going on versus how the Torah understands it. That is read but not translated. And the verses constituting the priestly benediction and the incident of David and Amnon, so King David and his son Amnon, who attacks his sister, those are read but not translated. And the Mishnah goes on and says, actually, here's some more things that we don't know how we should handle these particular texts. Oop, I went too far. One may not conclude the Torah reading, so we can't have a Haftorah reading, with the account of the divine chariot. So this is part of Ezekiel's vision at the very beginning of the book of Ezekiel. And the explanation says that this is because what Ezekiel saw and this description is really meant to remain hidden. It's part of this collection, this understanding, certainly for the rabbis, of texts that are mystical and perhaps too difficult to understand if you're just hearing it. However, Rabbi Yehuda permits this. So there's always disagreement, because that's what we do, especially in the Talmud. Rabbi Eliezer says, one may not conclude with the section from the prophets beginning with, make known to Jerusalem her abominations. Here, the example, again, it's coming from Ezekiel, but here the example has nothing to do with might be hidden, what might be mystical, what might give us insight into God, but rather this is because it speaks derogatively of the Jewish people. And so then the Gemara adds on to this Mishnah statement, there are portions of the Bible that are read and translated. There are portions that are read but not translated. And there are portions that are neither read nor translated. And so I'm having a hard time seeing the chat. I can't seem to pull up the bubble. But I thought I saw some messages coming in. There we go. Okay, good. So we have some questions to ponder before we move on. And I would love some commentary if you'd like to share. You don't have to answer all of them, but here are some things for us to dig into a little bit based on this first text from the Talmud. So first, what's the benefit of reading something without translation? So we're reading something in Hebrew or in another language without actually maybe understanding it or fully or grasping its whole meaning. What do we demonstrate when we say that this is a text we're not going to read at all? And finally, what do you hope to learn from Torah when you study it? Anyone want to jump in there? We're getting late. Let's start with, what's the benefit of reading something without translation? Why might we still do that? Oh, Eve, would you like to share? Are you there, or did you accidentally raise your hand?
Rabbi, there's 3 hands that are up. We have...
Yes, I see that. Thank you. I'm going to unmute Eve. And we'll see if she wants to share. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Alita. Nobody wants to let me
Yes,
unmute
I'm
them.
there.
There we go.
It's Alita.
Hi, Alita.
The benefit of reading something without translation, I suppose, is what may take place in a lot of synagogues around the country or around the world, where people who don't speak Hebrew or don't really even understand necessarily much of observance of Judaism can go to a synagogue or service and participate, even saying prayers that they don't know what the words mean. And there still is some benefit derived from that participation, or some comfort derived from hearing melodies or words that we may not understand, but from which we gain some either cultural or spiritual significance by participating and being present.
So there's something that speaks to us that there's tradition being passed on, there's meaning being passed on, even if we're not grasping all of it, even if we don't understand the words literally.
And we are part of the community by simply hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you're describing may be even a little bit more insidious, though, because it seems that there's an effort to keep people from knowing what the words are, what the meaning is, and then
Mm.
one questions why even share the words with them if you're going to keep the meaning from them, other than maybe just, as I suggested, to um, to form a ritual, even one of ignorance.
So, but yes, you're right that there might be some things that are being intentionally kept from people, and we're gonna touch on that a little bit more in a second. I'm gonna go to Eve.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Jolly good. I was thinking in more general terms, not just Hebrew, but of any text. It's respecting the integrity of the text and not putting ourselves in a position of deciding what should or shouldn't be included. It's a holy document, and it's not ours to decide which bits do and don't get left out. And even if we don't understand it, we need to include it.
Hmm. So there, right? There's also particularly here it's Shavuot, right? Like we say that all of Torah was received at Sinai, which means there's something about this, the Matan Torah idea that this is a gift, and even the gifts that we don't know always how to understand at first or make sense of, we don't throw them away. We don't get rid of them. I think about sometimes we're handed something and we have to learn how to use it first. Bonnie, I see your hand is up as well. Ooh, hold on.
First thing came, the first, oh, sorry.
There we go. Now you can.
Thank you. The first thing that came to my mind was that this was kind of R-rated text.
Some of
Not,
them are.
yeah, a little bit of living room learning. That, and I don't necessarily mean it all that it's racy or that, he's sleeping with his aunt by sort of marriage. More that in the sense that you have to reach a certain level of maturity, maybe, and by that understanding the Hebrew before, like the way that Kabbalah is not to be studied until you're learned and mature enough and old enough to handle it.
So that there's also, right, the idea, certainly within our tradition we have inherited this idea that there are things that we can't always grasp right away. We have to work up to some of these ideas, and certainly in the case of the chariot that we referred to in the beginning in the Mishnah, that's part of the rabbi's concern, that like if you study some of these mystical ideas, or also Kabbalah, you're gonna get lost, and so you've got to deal with the stuff here on earth first.
And the more important things first, the more crucial part of the Torah first.
So we have a couple of comments as well. Tom said, I see all the world's sacred texts as produced by people with imperfect, evolving understanding of the Most High. For example, one of the Psalms, and he references something that's quite graphic, ends with, "Blessed is the one who smashes the little ones against the rocks." Right? So there's sometimes really horrifying statements. And for Tom, he says that this was pre-evolved understanding, but it's not necessarily something that we want to propagate, that we would continue with, but that it's a particularly Torah is an evolving tradition, and that we are the latest generation participating in that process. And Rabbi Nico says, Elu ve'elu. So we have this teaching that these and these, they're all the lessons, they're all the words of God, even if we don't agree with them, and that diversity is part of the gift. I'm going to go to Norman Rosen, and then we're going to move on to our next text. Norman, if you'd like to speak.
Unmute.
Yes.
I'm looking at what is the benefit of reading something without translation.
Mm-hmm.
And I reject the concept that it's a good thing to read something without understanding what it
Mm-hmm.
means. I just can't fathom that that's a good idea. But the benefit to me of reading something without translation is that the person who's reading may be stimulated to learn the language that it is in the original without translation, so that they might understand it in the original.
Yeah, so that well, certainly for us, we moderns who have access to all the translations, certainly Rabbi Zilberman talked about Sefaria, for example, which is where a lot of these translations come from, that suddenly the understanding the translation is available to us at all times. It's sort of hard to wrap our minds around that. So we are going to move next. There are more comments coming in, but I want to keep going just a little bit. I over prepared, which is classic Rabbi, and we're not going to get to everything, but I'd love to get to a little bit more. And for those of you, I think, received the text in advance, you're welcome to read ahead. So the next text we're going to look at actually comes from the Torah itself. It comes from Parshat Bechukotai, which is the end of the book of Leviticus. We read it actually just a few weeks ago. And this portion is actually also sometimes known as Parshat Tochacha. It's a portion of reproach. Tochacha means reproach or rebuke, that and Tochacha in particular is something that's given and has to be given in a very specific way. It has to be done carefully and sensitively, and yet at the same time we know that it's still going to hurt. It's going to sting. It's not going to feel good to receive that sort of reproach. And so traditionally, when this particular section is read from a Torah scroll, the person who is reading that particular aliyah is meant to read it very quickly and almost quietly, actually, as if we're trying not to draw attention to ourselves, because it's a series of reproaches from God. And so we'll take a look at these from Leviticus 26. And if these things fail to discipline you for me, and you remain hostile to me, so God speaking to the Israelites, I too will remain hostile to you. I in turn will smite you sevenfold for your sins. I will bring a sword against you to wreak vengeance for the covenant, and if you withdraw into your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into enemy hands. When I break your staff of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in a single oven. They shall dole out your bread by weight, and though you eat, you shall not be satisfied. So it's easy to read these words right now and be particularly challenged by them, because it feels like they are touching very closely to our own experiences. What we see in the world right now that is concerning to us. There is hunger. There is emptiness. We don't feel satisfied. There is quite literally pestilence. And is this a punishment? No, of course not. But there is some sort of lesson that we're meant to draw from these words, though they make us uncomfortable. Just as there's some sort of lesson that each of us is going to have to draw from the experiences that we're having right now. And so I turn actually to a text that fell into my lap a little bit as I was getting ready for Shavuot. This year, in order to keep track of the days in sheltering in place, I engaged in a practice of counting the Omer, and I used a couple of different apps at the same time. And so there's one app in particular that comes from a rabbi named David Seidenberg called neochassid.org, and included with each of the days was a little reading. And lo and behold, Rav Kook, a 19th century, early 20th century rabbi, falls into my lap just as I'm getting ready for Shavuot in this particular conversation. He writes, so Within all the many rebukes in the holy books, even though through their teaching a person can find themselves becoming miserable, inside them is hidden and concealed the light of life and salvation, a great kindness and courage of heart. And it is precisely from the depth of the falling that one comes to the depth of the rising. And from the emptiness of Torah that is inside, one will come to love Torah. One will be empowered by its greatness and its beauty. And the disconnection of desire from this higher perspective can bring everything to goodness. And one would become wise and understand that the situation of the broken world is also for good and for blessing. God made the world to give life, and the end of everything will be a complete tikkun. So for Rav Kook, this is our opportunity to create our own healing in the world. That we feel vulnerable, we feel challenged by the words that we read, we feel uncomfortable, and that it's maybe a little bit of a goad to us. Not that this is a punishment, this isn't a theology of punishment, but that it's a reminder to us of how we want to live our lives and what we want to do with our lives, how we want to participate in the healing of the world. That there is meaning that we can derive from the depth of falling into the depth of rising. And so I'm going to take a moment now, and we're going to Josh, is it possible for us to do breakout rooms for just 5 minutes?
Sure.
Great, thank you. So I would love, we're going to break out into groups, hopefully of 4 to 5 people. And we're going to think back to a time in our lives when we felt particularly challenged. And what did we learn from that experience? You don't have to share the exact details of the challenge, but hopefully you can share a little bit of the learning so that each of us can learn from one another in this moment. So we'll just do this for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together and close up. coming back. So there is another well-known text, certainly from the Torah, is sort of seen as a partner to Bechukotai, as a collection of curses. It comes in the book of Deuteronomy as the Israelites are heading into, or about to enter the promised land. God describes this ritual that they'll have to undertake, where they go into two mountaintops facing one another, and they will hear blessings and curses, one from one mountaintop and one from the other, to remind them of the covenant. And the litany of curses is again horrible and as disturbing as some of the other texts that we've discussed already. To which Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch replies, which I would like to end on this particular note. Hirsch was a 19th century rabbi, sort of considered the forefather of modern Orthodoxy. And he's has this very fascinating Torah commentary. Oops, my time is up, so I better speak quickly. Okay. These two mountaintops, his point is that they come from the same soil. But one, Mount Ebal, which is where the curses are heard, is barren, while Gerizim is covered with lush vegetation to its very top. In the same way, blessings and curses are not dependent on external circumstances, but on our inner receptivity to one or the other, on our attitude toward that which brings blessing. When we cross the Jordan and take our first steps on the soil of the law that sanctifies us, the sight of these two mountains teaches us that we ourselves, by our own moral conduct, decide whether we are headed for Mount Gerizim or Mount Ebal. So we are in the middle of these two mountaintops right now, and it is our opportunity to decide which one we're going to look towards, and our opportunity to decide how we want to understand this experience. Some of it is awful and upsetting, but is there a blessing or a teaching or meaning that we can take from this experience? No matter what, that we can find some sort of comfort even in that which challenges us. Chag Sameach, we made it into the next day, friends, and that is my time.